In the next hour, we'll explore a city that's closely tied to the past with a strong respect for tradition. We'll take a tour through the Tower of London, where Henry VIII beheaded 2 of his wives. We'll see the changing of the guard both at Buckingham Palace and Windsor Castle. Then we'll go shopping in some of the most elegant, unusual, and famous areas of London, the city known as the crossroads of world commerce. Then we'll take side trips to beautiful Old English towns and villages, including Shakespeare's home and the town where he lived. You'll go inside palaces, still lived in by dukes and lords, including the birthplace of Winston Churchill. And we'll visit Old English castles with medieval histories, legends, and mysteries that are still unsolved. A visit to London makes the ancient stories of kings, queens, knights, and dragons come alive, the old and the new, the social, economic, and cultural center of the world. Hi, I'm Laura Mackenzie, and today I'm in London, England, a city that has so much history and tradition. I know that you're going to get just as caught up in it as I have. Right behind me is Buckingham Palace, and we're getting ready to see the changing of the guard, which is going to occur in just a few minutes. It happens every day at 11:30 in the morning during the summer, and every other day the rest of the year. Let's take a look. Weather permitting, the New Guard's regimental band leads the guard into the palace forecourt. For the next 30 minutes, the band plays military marches while the practical matters of changing guards is happening. The royal guards who guard Buckingham Palace, Whitehall, and other royal institutions are all part of the Household Division, comprised of 8 regiments, each with its own heritage. In order to get a good view for picture taking, you'll have to arrive at least 30 to 45 minutes early because the sidewalks are usually packed with tourists by 11 a.m. And another note, the way to tell if the Queen is in residence is if the British flag is flying on the roof. During the 30 to 40-minute ceremony, the captain of the guard and the posted sentry receive their orders, while the old guard marches off to their barracks and the new guard marches off to the guard room. In review, the guard changes every day in summer, every other day in winter, weather permitting, and do come early for good picture taking. The London Tower Bridge has a great view of the city from a glass-enclosed walkway high above the River Thames. Take the elevator up one tower, look at the view, cross the bridge, and come down the other. The bridge used to open for ships up to 50 times a day, but now only occasionally. It was completed in 1894 and has become a symbol of London across the world. Right now I'm standing on the Tower Bridge overlooking one of the most popular tourist spots in the city with one of the grisliest histories. Right behind me is the Tower of London, once a prison, and the location where King Henry VIII executed 2 of his wives, Anne Boleyn and Catherine Howard. King Henry VI was strangled in the dungeon. But aside from a few other strangulations, murders, drownings, and executions, it's a rather agreeable place and now houses the crown jewels, which are on display to the public. The lines do get long to see them, though, so I recommend going early in the morning or late in the afternoon. There are plenty of things to see inside, including more of the macabre, the headsman's axe, swords, and dungeons, plus milder exhibits, all-sized armor, the Chapel of St. John, and of course the crown jewels. The Tower of London is defended by 40 men known as the Yeomen of the Guard. I talked with the head of the guard, David Russell, who explained a little of why they're known as beefeaters.
The word beefeater is a nickname. We are, in actual fact, to be strictly correct, yeoman warders of Her Majesty's Tower of London. This is the Wakefield Tower. It can be visited today, and its origin, first of all these towers were used for defensive reasons.
This is where Anne Boleyn was executed, is that right? I mean, in
the tower itself, yes.
Was she in one of these towers
No,
before
she wasn't. No,
she died?
She was in the Queen's house. The inner part of the tower would have been completely sealed off. And of course it was there, in the inner part of the tower, that the kings and queens of England lived, there in their royal palace. Kings and queens of England lived on the top floor, so far from the ground. Of course, it was thought to have been the most secure. The next floor would have been given over to members of the court and the parliament of those days. Whilst here on this ground floor would have been the soldiers and servants. In the basement, with its walls 15 feet thick, would have been the stores of war and the victuals, and on the far side, on the opposite wall to this, that's where the torture chambers were. And as you can well imagine, with walls 15 feet thick,
You couldn't hear the screams.
you couldn't hear the screams of those being tortured. Interesting there, people the world over know of our ravens. There are 3 of them there. We have officially 6 of them. And the possible origin of these birds being in the tower is that up to the reign of Charles II, this stood in forest land and marshland. And of course these birds used to fly in to be fed from the royal kitchen. They were very numerous, as you can imagine, and because of this, on one of the turrets on the far side, it is a round turret, and that was where the Astronomer Royal used to carry out his calculations. Well, of course, with these birds fluttering around, he couldn't get his, whatever it was, his calculations accurate. And so the story goes that he asked the king, remember Charles I, whether or not something could be done with these birds. And so the king decreed that these birds should all be destroyed.
Aww.
Except 6, and this is the mystery, you see. Except 6, because if they were all destroyed, so the king thought, then would come crashing down his royal palace and fortress, and some great evil would overtake this country.
We then continued on to the interior courtyard.
Earlier you asked me about Queen Anne Boleyn. First of all, she was the second of Henry VIII's 6 wives. And she was executed for her infidelity. That was the excuse. But if you read between the lines, and I'm sure you have, you'll come to the conclusion that she was executed because she failed to produce for Henry VIII his longed-for son and heir. And it was on this spot here in 1536 that Queen Anne Boleyn knelt down whilst the headsman removed her head. Not with the traditional axe of those days, but not unnaturally, Queen Anne Boleyn had a horror of the axe, and she asked her husband to allow to be executed by the sword, which was in those days the French method of doing it. And so they brought from France a swordsman, and with a two-handed double-sided sword, he removed Anne Boleyn's head.
And who else was executed on this side? We have a sign over here.
Yes, another of Henry VIII's wives, of course, was Catherine Howard. Now, she was a young girl, really, and by this time, Henry VIII was 58, overweight, suffering from various complaints. And she, of course, took a young man to her bed. And she was found out. Also her lady-in-waiting, Viscountess Rochford, and both of them confessed and were later, of course, executed.
The Tower of London is one of the most popular tourist attractions in London and has over 40 million visitors a year. It does get crowded, though, especially the lines to see the crown jewels, so the best time to come is early in the morning to avoid the crowds. In review, don't miss the Tower Bridge and below it, the Tower of London. Take one of the famous double-decker buses for a tour of the city. Sightseeing in London will take you at least a day or two just to get oriented to what you'd really like to explore in depth. For the dedicated sightseer, there are a few landmarks that are important to London's history and today's everyday life. St. Paul's Cathedral is the third largest Christian church in the world. It's been the scene of many historic national occasions, including the wedding of Prince Charles and Lady Diana. The Houses of Parliament, or the Palace of Westminster, is where many kings have held court. It, of course, houses the most famous clock bell in the world, Big Ben. Westminster Abbey also represents a unique part of British history. It's been the setting for every coronation since 1066 and for numerous other royal occasions. Inside the Abbey, the Henry VII Chapel is an outstanding example of Tudor-style architecture. Colored banners, crests, and mantlings of the knights adorn the 16th century wooden stalls. The oak coronation chair was made for King Edward I. It was designed to hold the ancient stone of Scone seized from the Scots in 1296. The tomb to which Poets' Corner owes its origin belongs to Geoffrey Chaucer, the first great English poet. The placing of memorials to other poets began here in the 18th century, including those of Shakespeare, Eliot, Dylan, and Lewis Carroll. There's a lot more to see in London, including always busy Trafalgar Square. Famous Nelson's Column is here with 4 large brass lions at its base. Hyde Park is probably the best-known London park. Here is the Marble Arch, originally supposed to be an entrance to Buckingham Palace, but moved here. Wellington Arch, where Park Lane meets Piccadilly, contains a statue of a horse-mounted Duke of Wellington. He was the military leader who triumphed at Waterloo in 1815. The Palace of Whitehall is an imposing street of government buildings. It's where the Horse Guards parade every day and tourists can pet the mounted horses as they stand guard. The guards are not supposed to talk or react to anyone, but they will stand for you to have your picture taken with them. In review, these are more things to see in London. Another way to get a good look at London is to take a boat ride along the Thames. Boats regularly leave Westminster Pier and offer a different view of the city's buildings and monuments. A smooth sailing trip downstream to Greenwich takes about an hour. I talked with our boat captain, who knows a lot about what we were seeing along the way.
Most of the historical buildings are on the banks of the Thames. A lot of buildings you can only see from the Thames. Like where we came down before, you take St. Paul's Cathedral. Right, it's a landmark, but you'll get a better view from the river than you will from the road.
Volunteer guides will narrate your entire tour and tell you interesting facts about buildings and people along the river. They are volunteers and they'll pass the hat after the trip. It's up to you, but tossing in a few coins is appreciated.
These are very old buildings. That's an old tea warehouse. And that's been converted into luxury apartments. It might not look it from the outside, but an apartment in that building costs you somewhere raising about £150,000.
At the end of the line, you can tour the old sailing ship, the Cutty Sark. In review, for a different view of the city, take a cruise down the river to Greenwich. The former market at Covent Garden has been converted into a 3-story shopping and dining plaza.
Covent Garden used to be the traditional market for fruits, flowers, and vegetables, and it was the supposed location for Audrey Hepburn's Flower Girl character in the movie My Fair Lady. Well, the market has since moved, but Covent Garden is now filled with an assortment of shops, pubs, restaurants, and street entertainers.
After the market moved to the south bank of the Thames, the Covent Garden area became the site of an urban redevelopment project. Now it's one of London's most popular neighborhoods. The old fruit and vegetable market is now a shopping arcade, and the former flower market houses the London Transport Museum. London offers all kinds of different shopping experiences, from elegant and high style to far-out fashions. Most goods in British stores are subject to value-added tax. However, U.S. visitors are exempted on certain items. You can get a partial refund on items that you take with you, or ship the others home and don't pay it at all. Selfridges is a main department store on Oxford Street. Harrods department store is world famous and located in the shopping area of Knightsbridge. It's also known because here is where the royal family does their shopping.
Even if you don't like shopping in any other city, you'll be fascinated by the shopping in London, where the fashion rule of thumb is live and let live. Wear what you want and never mind what anybody else thinks. Prices do vary, though, from shop to shop, so compare prices before you buy.
Oxford Street is generally less expensive than Knightsbridge and has a good assortment of different kinds of stores. Remember to save your receipts for your value-added tax refund or have the shopkeeper ship your purchases home for you. Make sure you visit London's famous reject china shops, where your money buys more in English fine bone china, crystal, earthenware, and gifts. Rather than being damaged goods, they're usually just discontinued patterns. Most of the shops are grouped together in different shopping areas, whole streets with nothing but shops, stores, and complexes. St. Catherine Dock near Tower Bridge is a shopping and dining complex of old 19th century warehouses. Another shopping and browsing entertainment in London is the street market, a bustling slice of the city's life. There's always a good chance to pick up a bargain here. Several streets offer such fun, and one of the most popular is the antique market on Portobello Road all day Saturdays. The Underground Tube is a very convenient and efficient subway system throughout London. It will drop you right in the heart of Piccadilly Circus, a great place for shopping and entertainment. Piccadilly Circus is a famous traffic circle that's celebrated for its nightlife, fast food, and fast people. It's been called a neon jungle, the Times Square of London, and it's now heading in a new direction. The Trocadero is an example, and I talked with Lawrence Isaacson about the complex.
Well, Laura, we're now at Piccadilly Circus, and Piccadilly is in the heart of London, and the Trocadero is really in the centre of London in Piccadilly Circus. So let's now go in and have a look.
Okay.
The Trocadero is a 2-acre complex of shops, restaurants, and entertainment attractions on 3 levels. There's a massive 80-foot atrium at its center. 2 shopping malls bring visitors into the complex and the central atrium area from entrances on 2 different streets. The Trocadero has more than 30 different shops of all kinds. It's one of the first enclosed complexes of its type in London, open on Sundays, and a great escape from the sometimes cold and wet London weather. So in review, here's a list of the best places to shop in London. Also at the Trocadero is an assortment of different international restaurant areas. Here you can browse through a provincial French street. an Italian piazza, or an English square. Taste a selection of appetizers, wine, coffee, or ale before choosing one of the restaurants for a relaxed meal or snack, all under one roof. And don't forget that a big traditional English breakfast is a great way to start or end the day.
A famous author once said, the only meal to eat in England is breakfast 3 times a day. But the only place that you can get breakfast, a good British breakfast, after 11 o'clock in the morning is the Brighton Bell on Platform 1 at the Trocadero Center. So if you're in the mood for steak or eggs and kippers at 11 o'clock at night after the theater, this is the only place you're going to find it.
In review, it is possible to get breakfast all day and night in London. No visit to London is complete without a stop at a British pub, also known as a public house. You can enjoy your favorite brew in a friendly and congenial atmosphere, maybe even play a game of darts. Pub grub food is a traditional English fare like steak and kidney pie, bangers and mash, Cornish pasties, and pork pie, served in the pub. It's fast, inexpensive, and usually very good. Most pubs close between 3 and 5:30 and again for the night early at 11:30 p.m. London is full of nightclubs, discos, dinner dancing places, and jazz clubs. A lot of them require membership and formal wear. There's also a number of sporting clubs that feature dinner, dancing, and gambling. Soho is the main foreign quarter of London. Restaurants here offer international specialties of all kinds. London has almost as many theaters as restaurants. Most of them are all located on the West End. First-run dramas, comedies, musicals, and thrillers often include big-name casts. Theater guides are generally available at major hotels. This is a listing of where to go for nightlife in London. There's a half-price tickets booth at Leicester Square for day of performance shows. Getting around London is easy. There are a lot of cabs roaming the streets. A for hire sign is illuminated when the taxi is available. You can hail a taxi from the curb, call one by phone, or during rush hour line up at a taxi stand. The tip is about 15%. Public transportation is a fine way for visitors to get around London. The familiar red double-decker buses run everywhere. Get a map of central London issued by the London Transport, and it's available at any bus or underground station. Everyone in London uses the subway, known as the Underground Tube. It's safe and clean. It's also the fastest way to get around in rush hour. There are several car rental companies in London, but if you're going to drive on your own in or out of town, there are some things you should know. The rental agent will be happy to give you a quick lesson in the basics of driving on the left-hand side of the road.
The horn is here.
It doesn't work.
It doesn't until you turn it on. This is the indicators. I believe you call them blinkers. It's also the wipers. These are the side lights here. That is the headlights.
Okay.
And for full beam, you just flick that.
Got it.
All right.
All right. And what is S?
The S is for the standard driving when you're going on the motorway, and E is for economy. Makes it a lot easier.
Okay.
Be sure to get maps from the rental agent and plan your route before you hit the road. Don't be afraid to ask directions. If you're not used to driving on the left, pay special attention at corners and traffic circles called roundabouts.
Wish me luck.
Okay, this is no problem.
No problem, right.
All right, have a good trip.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Driving in London is not the easiest feat for an out-of-towner, since there are a lot of one-way streets. During rush hours, many thoroughfares feature special bus lanes and closed streets. It's really best to avoid driving in the city during rush hour. If you don't feel like driving outside the city on your own, trains and buses are available for excursions. Any place within 80 miles of London is easy to reach. In review, if you rent a car, drive on the left and pay attention at turns and roundabouts. If you don't want to rent a car, public transportation is safe, efficient, fast, and convenient.
About 20 miles west of London is the town of Windsor, an old English village, dominated by Windsor Castle on the other side of this bridge. The castle dates back over 9 centuries, and it's the oldest royal residence still in use today. It's also the only royal residence where you can actually go inside and take a tour.
Windsor is one of the most popular side trips from London. A settlement since the 12th century, it's been the home and burial place of kings and queens for 900 years. Queen Elizabeth likes to spend her weekends here. The main entrance to the castle is through the Henry VIII Gate on Castle Hill. Situated on a chalk cliff rising abruptly above the River Thames, Windsor Castle was originally built of wood by William the Conqueror. It was continued in stone by successive kings. You can walk into the outer courtyard and view the various buildings and grounds at no charge, but there is an entrance fee to go inside to view the various state apartments and Queen Mary's dollhouse. Windsor Castle also has its own daily changing of the guard ceremony. The Castle Guard is presented daily on the parade ground in winter and on Castle Hill in summer. When court is in residence, it's presented in the Castle Quadrangle. The crowds line up early and tour operators bring in people by the busload. You'll have to arrive early to get a good viewing spot for the changing of the guard. During the half-hour ceremony, you can see the soldiers marching, saluting, hoisting rifles, and performing all sorts of carefully choreographed drilling to the stirring renditions of the brass band. It's an impressive spectacle, and even though most tourists might feel like it's something you're supposed to see, maybe put on only as a tourist attraction, the English continue these ceremonial traditions simply because they want to. The changing of the guard represents a significant tie of past, present, and future, the sign of a great nation that's very much alive. And realizing the historical context, the pageantry of the changing of the guard then has much more meaning than simple visual appeal. In review, Windsor is an interesting day trip to tour Windsor Castle, but arrive early for the changing of the guard. Another side trip is to the town of Woodstock to see Blenheim Palace, about 60 miles from London. It's the home of the 11th Duke of Marlborough and the birthplace of Sir Winston Churchill. Blenheim Palace is set in over 2,000 acres of landscaped parkland, and it's now open to the public. I talked with curator Paul Duffy about Blenheim Palace.
Paul, how large is the estate?
Well, the park was originally a hunting park, Wychwood Forest, and it had a wall built around it to contain the animals. That was in the Middle Ages, and the wall was 9 miles long, and it made the park acreage some 2,200.
And how far are we from London from here?
Well, it's a lovely, easy drive. It's 63 miles from the centre of London. It's a motorway virtually all the way.
That's great.
Yes.
And how large is the palace behind us? How many rooms does it have?
Well, I'll answer your question, which came in two parts, if I may. Firstly, the palace, all the rooms and the gardens and the court, not these gardens, but the courtyards that you'll see, that covers some 7 acres. Mm-hmm. And these gardens extend to 50 acres. And that's all within the parkland. Now, the question about how many rooms there are, at the last count, there are some 200. Now, that's not 200 rooms open to the public, that's 200 rooms of all shapes and sizes. But there are some 20 major rooms which are open for visitors to see, where the family use from time to time.
And how often are you open to the public?
The palace is open from the middle of March to the end of October, every day from 11 until 6. And it's a great opportunity to see where a duke lives, the house where Sir Winston Churchill was born, and see some magnificent staterooms, and to see part of Britain's heritage, and to see that it's still lived in. It is, after all, a family home.
And you said it's one of the largest privately owned homes in England.
I would say it probably is the largest privately owned home in England, yes.
Could we go inside and take a look?
Yes, please do. Let's go along.
The palace has been the location for several television shows and feature films, and the 11th Duke of Marlborough still lives here in residence.
Paul, tell me a little bit about this room. What's it called?
Well, it's called now the Long Library. Long because of its length. It's 183 feet long. and it contained some 10,000 books. But originally it was the Great Gallery, and it was built to house the family paintings and also for somewhere for them to walk after lunch or after supper in wet weather. And many country houses in England have them, and they're built on the western side of the house, so they get most of the light during the afternoons, and with good windows and where you could exhibit all your family paintings.
The Duke of Marlborough, when he originally acquired this house, he did not come from a very wealthy background. So how was he able to build such a grandiose palace?
Well, he was a very successful soldier. He'd been elevated to the dukedom in 1702, and he was given the land, which is some 2,200 acres, by Queen Anne after the Battle of Blenheim in reward for his services, and also a sum of money to build the house. And it was befitting that a man who'd risen so high politically and militarily should have a suitable house to live in.
Visitors can walk through most of the main rooms and view the original art, antiques, and furnishings. The hair curls of Winston Churchill at age 5 adorn the bed in the room where England's great statesman and leader was born. Some of his own personal effects and interesting memorabilia are also here. The saloon, the state dining room, is now used by the family once a year on Christmas Day. Frescoes all around the saloon and on the ceiling were painted by French artist Louis Laguerre, who only charged £500 for his work. Over the chimney-piece in the first stateroom is Durand's portrait of Consuelo, the 9th Duchess of Marlborough. Blenheim's magnificent water terraces, designed for the 9th Duke of Marlborough, look down to the Palace Lake, which was once just a marsh. Looking across the lake and the miles of magnificent park studded with old oaks, Sir Winston Churchill proudly said, "This is the finest view in England," and few even today would disagree. While visiting Blenheim Palace, stay close by in the charming town of Woodstock and experience an Old English inn.
Old English inns are all different. They have individual characteristics and personalized service. Even checking in will not be the same as a regular hotel. Things vary from place to place. Hi, I have a reservation. Laura Mackenzie.
Good afternoon to you. Yes, we have been expecting you. If you wouldn't mind just signing in this form here. Thank you very much. Just a few questions I have to ask you. Would you like a call in the morning?
A wake-up call?
That's
yes,
right.
please. 7 a.m.
Thank you very much. And would you like a newspaper?
The Times, please.
Thank you very much. And will you be joining us for dinner this evening? Good. And we get very busy, so what sort of time would you like it?
8 o'clock, please.
Right, thank you.
Okay.
Thank you very much. I'll just give you the key and we'll take you off to the bedroom.
Okay.
Thank you. It's quite an interesting picture here of Blenheim Palace, which is just up the road here from us, only 2 minutes away. You're in fact on the 3rd floor, so we have to go around a few corridors to get there.
Okay.
Very creaky floorboards, but quite safe, I assure you. And again, we come around the corner. You're in a very lovely old timbered bedroom with original oak beams in there.
Old English inns don't have elevators and rarely have porters to carry your luggage, but the charm does outweigh the inconvenience.
How old is the hotel?
We date back to 1469.
Really? Is everything original?
Absolutely, completely.
Why are the ceilings so low?
Well, I think they were a lot shorter in that sort of age. And again, we come around the corner here, and your bedroom is just down here on the right.
Look at the floors.
The floors had about a 45-degree slant to the right, and it was like walking through a funhouse to get down the hall. But the building is an original coach house from the 15th century. All of the old inns have interesting individual histories, and staying in one will give you a great feeling of Old England.
Oh, this is great.
And then the bathroom's just over on the right-hand side.
Some inns have private bathrooms and some don't, and most of the hotels and inns in England have bathtubs instead of showers.
And all the furniture is in the style of the hotel. This is a very old wardrobe, 300 or 400 years old.
How'd you get it up the stairs?
That was difficult. It's been here as long as our family's been here, in fact.
this is
so
beautiful.
we've been here for 26 years now, over a quarter of a century. So it's been here much longer than we have.
A short drive away is the town of Warwick on the River Avon. Famous for the first and finest medieval castle in England, Warwick Castle was once in every sense of the word the center of England, as the Earls of Warwick played important roles in the country's early development. Surrounded by gracious parkland and gardens, the castle sits on the banks of the river. Within its massive stone walls and battlements are magnificent staterooms and splendid collections of arms, armor, pictures, and furniture. I talked with curator Paul Barker about some interesting facts on Warwick Castle.
Paul, briefly give me a little bit of the history behind the castle.
Yes. Now, we're going to go back to Saxon times. This is in the 10th century. And it is said in the year 914, because the Vikings who came to this part of the kingdom, which is the center of England, virtually anyway, they were a damn nuisance here in Warwick and elsewhere. They ravaged and pillaged and raped and everything else. They threw up an earth wall around the village of Warwick. And it must have extended down to here, because right behind this massive stonework we have the River Avon. And there's a natural crossing place there, a ford. You get horses across and men across. So the Saxons, we think, had an outpost here, guarding, as it were, under observation, the north bank of the River Avon. Now, this mound here, although there's a natural core of rock there, sandstone, that was man-made, and it is Norman. Now, William you know, the Battle of Hastings, everyone's heard that, 1066. 2 years later, 1068, William the Conqueror arrived with his army in this part of the kingdom. He was gradually moving up, slowly up north with his army, subjugating as he went along, and he instructed his noblemen and his knights to start building a series of castles to defend his rear against attack from the rear. And this was one of them. And the Norman castles, the simplest sort of castle, are called motte and bailey. Motte is a mound. You have the mound there. And the bailey is the open area in front, or the courtyard.
Which is this?
Which is this here. Now, what happened was that was man-made, but on the core of solid rock or sandstone. And it's bigger than perhaps you might think. And on the top, they put a keep, really. It was a stockade in wood, like a palisade. And they dug a ditch, maybe 2 ditches around that.
And that was the first castle?
That was the first castle. And then there's a great ditch around this, you see, here. And then they built, and then they started to build a stockade again in wood. And eventually, once the earth had settled down, particularly there, they started building in stone. And they took that stockade away, and they built in stone what they call a shell keep. So that was really the start of the castle. Very simple, motte and bailey castle.
Well, all the stone structures around here, were they built at the same time?
No, they were built later. And if you look over there, there's lovely towers. You've got Caesar's Tower and Gaius Tower on the left. And between the gatehouse and the Barbican and the curtain wall in between, now, those are 5 levels they have up there, these 2 towers. But in this gatehouse there, where the clock is, do you know, there are nearly 40 rooms in there alone. They're very tiny, a lot of them, but there are just over 41, I think there are. Now, that was built all in the 14th century as part of a protracted building campaign of building. For instance, that tower was done in 1305, but it could well have been built on an earlier tower there.
Well, that's the tower that has the dungeon in it.
That is the one, yes.
Can we go take a look at that?
Yes, we can do,
okay,
certainly. We'll do that, yes.
The dungeon is now open to the public. For a really serious offense, a person would be hung alive in chains until his body completely rotted away. It's said that even the strongest men who had stood fearless at the time of sentencing broke down and cried when measured for their chains. On the wall stocks, people were hung from their ankles for their crimes, being left to manage as best they could in the cold, unventilated dungeon. The torture room displays various racks and horrifying instruments of pain. The torture of the boot was a metal boot with spikes in 2 different halves that would be fitted and tightened onto a victim's leg, sometimes also filled with boiling water. On the famous Roman rack, the prisoner would be stretched until his arms and legs dislocated. Other gruesome gadgets are displayed, all guaranteed to make any captured prisoner tell everything he knew to his interrogators.
Paul, why does the back of the castle look so much larger than the front? I didn't realize there was so much space back here.
this here, we call this the south face of the castle. It's absolute massive stonework. It is deceptive from the courtyard, I agree. It looks so much bigger. It just looks so much bigger. That's all. There are, in fact, if you look at that, there are 3 levels of windows.
Yes.
And those are the 3 levels of the castle. But in the tower, Caesar's Tower, and the other tower, there are 5 levels. Of course, you know, the rooms go on and on, they're higher and higher. And if you look right the way along here, the 3rd level, you come to 3 windows, and below it, 1 little slit. That, in fact, is the lowest room in the castle, and that goes down to the old cold larder. It's a little circular room where they used to hang the game, you know, dead deer and boars and chickens, not chickens so much, probably swans and things in the days gone by. Now, below that, you see, there's still a massive stonework. It's all buttressed, heavily buttressed there. And whereas this castle is built on a core of solid rock, sandstone, like the base of the mound I mentioned earlier, it seems very odd, in fact, and many people think, quite a number of authorities think, that there must be something below those 3 levels there.
Oh, there must be.
But there must be other rooms.
Are there?
Now, well, I don't know. We never looked, we never tried to see. But you see, the 3rd lot of windows is the, I mentioned before, where those windows are open, that's the restaurant, and that is the undercroft, and you get this beautiful vaulted ceiling, and it has a tiled floor. But that is only halfway down, so there must be something below that.
You mean you've never found anything below that?
No, never.
I can't believe that.
Well, it means getting pneumatic drills and having a go and penetrate the floor in different places.
Think of the things you could find under there.
There's some very nasty things you might find down there as well. I don't know.
What is this building over here?
Well, that's the mill. You see the old water wheel?
Mm-hmm.
We are, in fact, at this very time working on that, try and get that wheel to turn again, because it's a very pretty sight. But once this castle was built, one of the requirements naturally was food, and they had to have a mill right up against the castle for the grinding of the corn to make the bread. And there's always been a mill here. At one time, it was further up the river. And there you've got the beautiful waterfall there.
Well, to get from the castle to the mill, you mean they had to walk around? Don't you think there was a passageway underneath?
No, I don't think there was a passageway. We used to think there was a possibility of that. But to do that, you'd have to go right way down, many feet below the level of the courtyard, you see, and come up again. It doesn't really make sense. But to the left of that mill, you can't see it from this angle, there is a cavern there with an arch, which has been filled in with brick and stone. And some people used to think that was where you would get into the mill. But it is thought now that is where they stationed the wagons for the bags of corn and flour and so on.
Mm-hmm. Don't you think that in that room that was sealed, there might have been stairs or some way to get up to the main castle?
You're a romantic, aren't you? You may be right. I suppose one day we'll have to try.
Inside, Madame Tussaud's museum has created wax figures portraying the actual people involved in a weekend party honoring the Prince of Wales in 1898. A large portion of the furniture and fittings in the rooms were actually here in 1898, and the remainder are exact copies based on photographs taken at the time. The state dining room was a late addition to the castle, and the room has witnessed many distinguished diners over the years, including earls, kings, and queens. The Great Hall is the most impressive area of the castle, adorned with original antiques and exact replicas of over 1,000 pieces of arms and armor. The armor was worn by the ordinary private soldiers, and some of the breastplates and helmets are very heavy, made to stop musket balls fired at very short range. The horses carried a full load of armor themselves and had to be exceptionally strong to sustain a couple of 100 pounds of man and steel. One of the highlights for visitors is seeing the famous Red Knight, who makes his appearance daily around 1 o'clock. He'll be happy to explain the pieces of armor he's wearing and the history behind it. In review, Warwick Castle is an excellent side trip from London. Our next stop is Stratford-upon-Avon, an easy train ride from London on the Shakespeare Express.
The town of Stratford-upon-Avon is probably one of the most popular tourist destinations outside of London, and probably best known as the place where William Shakespeare lived and died. Certain areas of the town are preserved almost as they were in the 16th century, and I think it's one of the most picturesque areas in England.
For its size, Stratford-upon-Avon has a greater concentration of historic buildings than any other English town. Almost everything is within walking distance, and convenient tour buses run all day to the attractions outside of the area. One popular thing to do is rent a canoe or a small boat for a trip up and down the river. I took a ride with Roger Thompson of the Tourist Board, who explained the importance of William Shakespeare to the history of the area.
Well, as you know, Laura, Stratford-on-Avon and Shakespeare are almost synonymous. This really is the beginning of the story. This is the house that we assume Shakespeare was born in. Nobody says he was born here, because just like your birth certificate, it doesn't say the house you were born, the town, yes, but not the house. This, however, was the main home of Shakespeare's father and mother, and John Shakespeare, William's father, filled every post on our town council here, from ale taster to chamberlain or mayor, so it's quite an important family in the town.
Besides William Shakespeare's birthplace, the grounds of his retirement home and other family homes are also open to the public. Roger told me a little more about other buildings in the area.
When you look around you, to me, Laura, this is a lovely example of what towns like Stratford are all about, because you've not just got Tudor architecture here, you've also got a lovely example of Georgian architecture, and here to your left again, a lovely example of Victorian. So you've got three periods of architecture nicely blended together.
Other popular Shakespearean homes include the thatched roof house of his wife, Anne Hathaway, and the house of his mother, Mary Arden. In review, take the Shakespeare Express train from London to Stratford-upon-Avon. And here's a list of the most popular things to see in town. At night, visit the Royal Theatre, where you can see a Shakespearean play performed exactly as it was in Shakespeare's time. Near Stratford-upon-Avon is Ragley Hall, the beautiful 17th century home of Lord Hertford and his family. The home has been in his family for over 300 years. The grounds are beautifully landscaped, and the large building in which Lord and Lady Hertford and their children live is open for public tours. I talked with Lord Hertford about the estate.
Could you give me a brief history on the house itself?
It's 304 years old, built 1680, and it's belonged to my family ever since.
And you've lived in the house all the time?
No, my first 7 years were wasted. We lived, my parents and I lived 3 miles away. But we moved in here when I was 7, and I actually became the owner of Ragley 2 years later when I was only 9 years old.
Really?
I inherited this house in 1940. The great thing about inheriting a huge and derelict house, which is actually at the time a hospital, in 1940, is that from that point things have to get better. They couldn't possibly get worse.
Why was it a hospital?
Because it was needed during the war.
And you told me earlier about after the war that it was completely derelict and was almost demolished.
It was so derelict that my trustees wanted to sell it to a firm of demolition contractors. That's how bad it was. But I was convinced that we could live here. And eventually I met a gal who agreed with me, and immediately after our wedding, which was 28 years ago, we moved in.
And now it's open to the public?
Yes, has been for 25 years.
You have quite a few antiques in the house.
Oh, a lot, yes.
Any with a special history?
Well, it's most famous, I think, for the Great Hall, the entrance hall, which has the most wonderful baroque plasterwork in England, designed by Gibbs in 1750. And our collection of portraits by Sir Joshua Reynolds is quite special. And, of course, the new thing that's attracting a lot of visitors these days is the new mural by Graham Rust.
Tell me about that.
Well, he began painting it in 1969, and he finished it last year.
14 years.
14 years of work. Not, to be honest, he didn't work all the time. He worked here about 1 week a month, and the other 3 weeks he went away to earn what he called rail money elsewhere. Apparently what I paid him didn't really count.
In the mural, you have pictures painted in of you and your family.
All our 4 children, together with their godfathers and godmothers.
And you pointed out in the mural that there was a special little flying saucer. Tell me that story.
Simply because my wife's aunt believes that flying saucers are coming to the world to rescue us, which I should think we sorely need, don't we? And she said she would only be painted in the mural if we put in a flying saucer, so we did. But what I think is so entirely typical is that she is the only person who's seen it. She always is, poor love. Nobody else ever looks.
Be sure to visit Ragley Hall near Stratford-upon-Avon. For the 18 to 35-year-old traveler on a limited budget, here's a special way to see England and other parts of the world that's economical but more fun than camping. Top Deck Tours has custom-built double-decker buses with sleeping and cooking facilities on board. You travel for a couple of weeks at a time, and you can decide for yourself where you want to go and what you want to see. Accommodations in England come in all prices and sizes. This is an example of a top-of-the-line first-class room, but it does have first-class prices. Rooms with more moderate prices have all the facilities, but are generally more modest in decor. You get what you pay for. Where to Stay London is a good guide from the London Tourist Board, and do reserve ahead of time. Besides hotels and motels, everything from bed and breakfast inns to youth hostels are available, but you will share a bathroom. There's a noticeable difference in room vocabulary, so if you want a room with 2 beds, ask for a twin, not a double. English bathrooms have extra big bathtubs, but you'll rarely find showers except in the best hotels. The following is a list of general information you'll find useful for a visit to England. You'll need a valid passport, no visa and no vaccination, and do declare any tobacco or alcohol. The 2 airports serving London are Heathrow and Gatwick. Taxis to the city are convenient but expensive. It's cheaper to take the train. There's no camping allowed in the city parks, and all campgrounds are located outside the city. Children are not allowed in pubs, but good babysitting services are available. Be sure to bring rainwear and a jacket, even in the summer. Pay telephones can be confusing. Just wait to insert your money until after the connection is made and you hear the beeps. For overseas calls, be wary of hotel surcharges or call from an international telephone bureau. The embassies and consulates can help you with any of these problems. Put your valuables in the hotel safe, be wary of pickpockets, and always use traveler's checks. If you rent a car, learn the traffic signs and laws, and don't drink and drive. Electric current is 220 volts, so take a converter with British adapters. For emergencies, dial 999 or contact Traveler's Aid at Victoria Station. People speak English with a sprinkling of slang and euphemisms. The unit of currency is the British pound, and banks have the best exchange rates. Bobbies are the unarmed police force, and do address them as constable in person. Hotels and restaurants often add a service charge, otherwise tip approximately 15%. Barman will take a drink instead of a tip and give porters approximately 50 pence per bag. Public toilets are labeled as follows, and don't expect anyone to know what a restroom is. A queue is the British word for a line. Always go to the end. It is safe to drink the water all over Great Britain. Be sure to reconfirm your return flight and allow yourself extra time at the airport.
Well, I hope you enjoyed seeing a little bit of England with me today, and if you're planning a trip, maybe it will save you a little time, trouble, and money. And if you've already been, I hope it brought back a few nice memories for you. From London, I'm Laura Mackenzie. Bye-bye.